crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I am here with a card for createasmilestamps. I am filming live, which is I know not everyone's favorite for a card video, but just really crunched for time, and so this is quite a bit faster. I'm going to be doing a Christmas in July theme for my cards today. And part of the reason I wanted to share these with you, which will sound kind of silly, is I'm really struggling with them. And so I thought it might be interesting to just kind of talk through that process and about, like, you know, what you can do if you're feeling frustrated or like your project's just kind of not working out the way it is in your head. So I originally got the idea because I want to do a Christmas in July thing. I was going through some of my stamps yesterday. I saw this set and I thought it was really pretty. I haven't got a chance to work with it yet, and rather than wait till Christmas time, I wanted to go for it. Although I will say this is the Season's Greeting stamp set from Create a Smile, and it has a For You and Eat, Drink, and Be Happy, which I don't think would have to be for holiday cards, particularly the For You. So you could recreate a similar card but not have it for the holidays, because I don't have a lot of anything about this that is particularly Christmassy or anything like that. So as you can see, the sentiment is a little bit tricky to read, and I'm trying to kind of shine it in the light so that you can see it. It is fairly easy to read in real life, but it definitely has a sort of like faded look, like it's either fading into focus or out of focus, has this bit of fuzziness to it, which is not exactly what I was going for, but I'll talk about ways you might be able to get around it and why I'm not using those ways, essentially, or show you how you could use those ways. Anyway, to get started, I have the stars, and I wanted to use this paper sourced paper that, or cardstock, it's cardstock. It's quite shiny, and that is what is causing some of my troubles today, because I have found this sort of shiny paper is slick and it doesn't dry. Ink doesn't dry on top of it. Embossing is fine, and so that's kind of why I was inspired to emboss today, but if I were to stamp any dye ink on it, it would either take a really long time to dry or it would never dry. And so I am kind of limited in what I can do with that in mind. Alright, so using Versamark ink and embossing powder bag, I'm just going to stamp these stars. And also, so with the sentiment, if I emboss the sentiment, it gets that fuzzy look. But if I don't emboss the sentiment, I can't really work on top of the embossing powder that's under it, because just like the slick paper won't dry, embossing powder won't, ink won't dry on top of embossing powder. So I'm much more limited in my options for how to make this permanent. Now, the other solution would be to not use a shiny paper, and that way I could stamp with a different kind of ink. But again, I was trying to go for a very metallic look, as this is a Christmas card, and I love metallics and glitter at Christmas. But I will show you, if you wanted to do it with a solid paper, what that could look like. Now with this, I think it's even more important to have your heat gun nice and hot before you create your cards, because you're going to layer the embossing powder a few times. You're going to apply embossing powder a few times, and if you melt the embossing powder too much, it can start to look really distorted and lose its crispness. So I'll shake the embossing powder on there. I don't keep all of my embossing powder in containers like this, but I do keep some of the colors that I really like to use, and so since I use gold, silver metallics a lot, particularly during the holiday season, I keep them in those larger buckets. I have embossing powder where I don't want it. Even though I use the embossing powder bag, which helps a lot, I don't know what's going on here, but there's these little lines that should not be sticking. sometimes a little hair or something gets stuck on your stamp. You'll stamp it out because as you can see it's coming back, which means it got stamped on there. And that's particularly a concern if you have little furry friends in your craft room. Okay. So I'm going to kind of skip ahead at this point so that you don't have to hear too much of the heat gun. So now I have 3 different pieces embossed here to kind of show you what the alternative next steps are. I have 2 with the shiny paper, and then 1 on some simple gray cardstock to show you that alternate option. So the simplest additional thing that you could do is to just emboss your sentiment in the center, and then you won't have to worry about the layering that makes it look more faded, but you'll add less colors and you won't be able to utilize that large circle stamp from the stamp set, but it will create a beautiful card. So embossing powder bag, important step as mentioned earlier. Sprinkle on some gold, tap it off, and then I would emboss that by applying the heat gun. But if you do want to take advantage of that cool, so there's just like the solid stamp that's, you know, being used to create an effect. If you want to take advantage of that, here are my 2 thoughts. Using the solid colored cardstock, which is, you know, a pretty obvious answer, but sometimes when I'm crafting, I really try to make something work. Like I liked that shiny paper, and so I wanted to see what I could do with it and not just give up on the idea. So then I would suggest grabbing a gray ink. Let's see, there's a wide variety of gray inks out there, of course. I have a pretty dark piece of cardstock, so I think that I probably want to go darker, but I could also go lighter to kind of help the gold pop off of it more. So yeah, let's try that alternative. You know, you can, again, of course, just kind of go with the bond. So I'm doing MANATEE from Lawn Fawn, which is what I would call a warm gray, a brownish gray. And I have lined up my MISTI ahead of time, in part because I knew I was going to record this live to help speed things along a little bit. I'm going to tap it on there to give it pretty good coverage. I'm definitely wanting to use my MISTI because I'm working with such a large solid stamp. If it doesn't give me a good impression the first time, don't have to worry about it. Same thing with all this detail of the stars. That's why I would like to use a stamp positioner. If I used a stamp block and I had any mistakes, it would be hard to line up that much detail a second time. And I don't know, I know like everyone says, oh, clear stamps, they make it so easy, you could just line up the stamp again and re-stamp it. I don't have much luck with that. So you can let me know, do you have luck with that, or are you kind of on the board of stamp positioners save the day? I know the MISTI's not the only one, it's just the one that I got first, so it's the one that I have. But okay, so this is still a little splotchy. Usually dye inks will sort of even out over time, so I think that it's got pretty good coverage, and I'll leave it there. Now, as you can see, this was a much lighter ink in theory, but it's on a dark paper, so it's going to appear even darker, and so I guess there's probably not too much of a difference between the light and dark colors on this dark cardstock, but I'm happy that I leaned towards the lighter color so that it didn't come off as black, because I do want it to come off as more of a silver, even though it's distinctly gray. It is replacing the silver in my card. So the other thing, the original thing that I did that, you know, with mixed success because of the blurry sentiment, I stamped it and then silver heat embossed it. So I'm going to stamp the circle again. Oh, I forgot to put my embossing powder bag down. We'll see if we regret this. There's probably a little bit still on there from when I did the stars. So we're just gonna probably have to hope there. Right. Looks like I got pretty lucky that there was still a lot of anti-static there. So I'm gonna emboss and let some things dry and then be back to finish up the card. Alright, I've melted some of the embossing powder onto the last step. This one is basically done, but I do have to add the sentiments to these two. And this time I'm just going to use a stamp block. It's been pretty successful. I am using a juicier Versamark pad. I have two. One is a little bit drier. I just haven't refilled it yet. There's no particular reason for that. Swiping them with an embossing powder bag certainly wouldn't hurt at this point, although as you saw, if you've already laid it down, you're going to be more successful if you don't do it again. Okay, so this is a slick surface. As you stamp this down, it's going to have the tendency to slip, so you're going to have to want to be careful and go straight up and straight down. Sorry that I'm tripping over my words a little bit. Nature of being live. So I've pressed it down. I didn't feel too much of a wiggle. Now when I lift it, I do want to lift straight up so that I don't smear the words. All right, looks pretty good, and just want to cover it with the gold embossing powder now. Okay, as you see right there, it still looks pretty crisp and normal, but I think that it's just the two layers of, you're kind of slightly melting the silver underneath, and that's what causes it to have that faded look there. Stamp this one should be, you know, just like regular embossing, just like I did with the stars, but I want to show you all three options in the end. Okay. Oh, so the gray ink was still a little bit sticky and it looked like it was almost ruined there for a minute, which was pretty scary. But I flicked it and was able to get most of that off, and it's really only stuck to the sticky areas. Again, another good point about why you really want to use that static bag. Get as much of that. You can also test it, so you can put the static bag over it and then maybe put some clear embossing powder and make sure that it works before you do your stamping, because otherwise you could brush it all off, but once you've done your stamping it's harder to brush it all off. So hopefully that made sense. Now, I do have a sprinkling around it because I did not let my ink dry completely. When I do the embossing over the other embossing powder, when the layered embossing here, I make sure that it melts and then I take it right off the heat, because the longer you leave it, the more fuzzy it will start to look. As I found through experimenting. And then so this here, you can see what I mean about there being some sort of like some shiny dust around it. And basically I just kind of have to accept that that's a mistake, but also think of it as could be part of the design, adding a little bit of extra sparkle to it. But if you let your gray ink dry more, as you can see, the gray is continuing to dry back. I was just in a little bit of a rush today, so I've kind of caused my own trouble there. And it will probably continue to fade over time and make that gray even look a little bit more subtle. So to finish off these cards, I took another Paper Source cardstock, this time in a gold color. I cut a random shape out, well not random, this is the stitched scallop die from Scrappiness. And since I was using that for these, I already had it out. I cut this out of the center of them because I'm going to layer it. And this would all just be wasted pretty gold paper. So by cutting this out, I have it for a different project. And then I have my 3 different alternative card fronts. I could lay down the full-on embossing with the layered embossing and this sort of fuzzy sentiment. I have the solid cardstock version that allowed me to do some stamping in the background with a little bit of mistake. And I have the simplest version, which is the shiny cardstock, but with just stamping the stars and the sentiment and skipping out on that centerpiece that was giving me a bit of trouble. Let me know which of them you ultimately liked best. And I hope that this was helpful to kind of just see how when you might be struggling with an idea or a card concept, how you can sort of push through and come up with some different alternatives that you might like better. Even though that I have these fuzzy ones that didn't, you know, I was trying and they didn't come out the way I wanted, I tried an alternate solution. I think they're all usable, and I will, you know, likely use or donate all of the cards that I created today. I will leave you a link in the video description below to the Create a Smile blog, as well as to all of the products that I use. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have an awesome day. Bye.